Welcome back to The Explainer. To all the law students and neophyte lawyers joining us today, get ready because we are taking a deep dive into a really fascinating, highly instructive 2020 Supreme Court decision. We are looking at People versus Eddie Manansala GR No 23-3104. We're going to unpack the specific elements of murder, the crushing weight of circumstantial evidence, and exactly how CCTV footage intersects with the rules on electronic evidence. It's a great case, so let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. To make sure you get the most out of this analysis, we are going to follow the classic case digest format to keep things structured and completely exam ready. Number 1, the facts of the case. Number 2, the core legal issues. Number 3, the Supreme Court ruling. And number 4, key legal doctrines. Section 1, the facts of the case. A deadly encounter in Tondo. Let's set the scene. We're at an apartment on Severino Reyes Street in Manila, where what started out as a bitter neighborhood dispute over electricity ultimately turned fatal. Just one day prior to the killing, there was a very public altercation between the victim, Armando Ramos, and the accused, Eddie Manansala, and it was all over the installation of illegal electric jumpers. Fast forward to November 2nd, 2013, right around 8 p.m., two brothers, Edward and Elmer Reyes, are just hanging out outside Armando's apartment when suddenly they hear a gunshot ring out from inside. Moments later, Armando falls down the stairs, bleeding heavily. 3 days later, on November 5th, after an extensive hot pursuit operation, the police arrest the accused in San Jose del Monte, Bulacan. Now, during the trial, the accused actually presented an alibi. He claimed he was traveling to Bulacan when the shooting happened. So you have to wonder, how did the state prove he actually pulled the trigger? Well, this brilliantly illustrates the prosecution's strategy. You see, they didn't have a single perfect eyewitness who actually watched the bullet enter the victim's body. They didn't have that smoking gun testimony. Instead, they relied on a completely unbreakable chain of circumstantial evidence. Just look at these links. Witnesses heard a gunshot inside the house. Immediately after, a witness saw the accused facing the stairs with a gun aimed upwards. Then he was seen hurriedly fleeing towards Alico Street, weapon still in hand. Next, the victim falls with a fatal gunshot wound to his left back, traversing upwards. And the final, absolutely devastating piece of the puzzle? Barangay CCTV footage that captured a man entering the house, shooting, and leaving. Moving right along to Section 2, the core legal issues, assignments of error. I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of the appellate justices here. When a conviction relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and a barangay camera, how exactly do you evaluate it? The Supreme Court had to resolve two fundamental questions of law. First, did the prosecution's circumstantial evidence, combined with that video footage, sufficiently prove the accused identity as the killer beyond a reasonable doubt? And second, did the prosecution successfully establish the qualifying circumstances of treachery and evident premeditation? As you know, these exact elements are absolutely crucial. They are what elevate a standard killing to murder. If the prosecution fails to prove them, the whole conviction drops down to homicide. All right, let's look at Section 3, the Supreme Court ruling weighing the evidence. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the court handled the CCTV footage under the rules on electronic evidence. The defense went hard on this. They argued that the victim's son, Asaz, was simply not qualified to authenticate the barangay CCTV footage. Why? Because, well, he didn't personally record it, and the camera belonged to the barangay, not him. But the Supreme Court firmly rejected this argument. They clarified that authentication is not limited solely to the person who made the recording. Basically, any competent witness who can testify to its accuracy can authenticate it. Because the son was able to establish the origin of the recording and clearly explain how it was transferred to the compact disc presented in court, it was deemed perfectly valid evidence. So the court affirmed the identity of the shooter. The identity was solid. But what about the nature of the crime? Let's compare the two alleged qualifying circumstances. First up, treachery. That was affirmed. The medical legal findings showed the bullet actually entered the victim's lower back and traveled upward. Combined with the CCTV, this proved a sudden, stealthy attack from behind while the victim was simply walking up his stairs, rendering him completely defenseless. No way he could fight back. However, evident premeditation? That was rejected. You see, the trial court had assumed that because there was a public altercation about those electric jumpers the day before, the accused must have deliberately planned the killing. But the Supreme Court said no, that's not how it works. A prior altercation doesn't automatically prove cool thought and reflection or deliberate planning. Without solid proof of exactly when the plan was hatched and a sufficient lapse of time to reflect on it, evident premeditation falls. But because treachery was still present, the crime remains murder. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 4, Key Legal Doctrines, Takeaways for Practice. These are your essential takeaways for practice, the real meat of the ruling. The court leaned heavily on the vital doctrine from People v. Evangelio, which states, quote, circumstantial evidence is sufficient to sustain conviction if the combination of all circumstances is such as to produce a conviction beyond reasonable doubt, end quote. The court emphasized that a judgment of conviction can totally be sustained when the circumstances form an unbroken chain that points directly to the accused, to the exclusion of all others. Make no mistake about it, an unbroken chain of circumstantial evidence is just as deadly to a defense as a direct eyewitness. So the crucial point here is how the court modified the damages based on the final penalty, because evident premeditation was struck down and there were no other aggravating circumstances present. The penalty reverted strictly to reclusion perpetua. Following the landmark doctrine in People v. Ugeta, the damages for reclusion perpetua are uniformly set at 75,000 pesos each for civil indemnity, moral damages, and exemplary damages. Also, look really closely at the actual damages of 107,286 pesos and 17 centavos. The court only awarded amounts strictly supported by official hospital and funeral receipts. The family had actually submitted a handwritten list of 36,000 pesos and other miscellaneous expenses, but the court threw it right out. The rule is strict, folks. No official receipts, no actual damages. And before we wrap up the damages discussion, keep this number in mind, 6. As is standard in current jurisprudence, all of these monetary awards earn interest at the rate of 6% per annum, counting from the date of finality of the decision until they are fully paid by the accused. Before we go, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to really ponder on. How will the ever-increasing prevalence of barangay CCTV cameras change the landscape of circumstantial evidence in future criminal litigation? As we've clearly seen in this case, technology is rapidly bridging the gaps where human eyewitnesses fall short. I challenge all of you neophyte lawyers and law students to deeply consider this intersection of modern surveillance and the rules on electronic evidence as you prep for your future practice. It's a literal game changer. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep up the great studying, and I will catch you on the next one.